Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. I am in a new spot in my house trying out some new lighting. However, I think this room is kind of echoey, so I apologize if the audio isn't good. I'm just still trying to figure out the best place to film. Today I am going to be reviewing the unfinished game Pascal, Fermat, and the 17th Century Letter that made the world modern. This is by Devlin, who has written some other books. I'm not sure how I know his name, but I am familiar with him and I don't think I've read any other books by him, so I am curious to know how I'm familiar with the author. But this was a book that I read. I intended to film to put out on Monday, but it's now Saturday, so I'm a little bit behind, but this was my math book for the week and I had an enjoyable time reading it. So let's discuss the unfinished game, what's going on in this book, and what you can expect if you read this book. So probability and statistics is a field that influences a lot of our day-to-day life today, and we tend to take for granted the ability or the knowledge that we can calculate probabilities of an event occurring. So what are the odds that you roll a 6 if you roll a equally weighted six-sided die, these probabilities, or like the probability that you're going to come out of a surgery without complications, these sort of probabilities are things that come up again and again in our daily life, but are not things, and are things that we take for granted, but are not things that were common throughout human history. So the ability to calculate the probability that something is going to occur or that an event is going to occur is something that has come about very recently in terms of mathematics in the modern world. And this book discusses one of the key events, which was a letter exchange between two mathematicians, Pascal and Fermat, to really solidify this idea of probability, or the ability to calculate the probability of an event occurring. So this leap in statistics, which is best captured on page 4, is the ability to calculate probabilities transformed the practice of statistics, changing it from the mere collection and tabulation of data to use the data to draw inference and make informed decisions. Without the ability to quantify risk, there would be no liquid capital markets, global companies, etc., etc. So this really took the shift from calculating or just collecting data to be able to calculate probabilities. Now, all of this probability stuff really kicked off not from a love of mathematics necessarily, although Pascal and Fermat were both approaching it from a mathematical perspective, but it comes from gambling. Gambling and games, and the modern version in the form of casinos, heavily rely on math, particularly probability and statistics. It's why the casino always wins. The math is in their favor. They have thin margins per se, but that if the 1% is in your favor, is in the house's favor versus your favor, the casino is going to win over time, every time. So casinos, gambling, the lottery, all of that stuff has a lot of statistical and mathematical backing, and gambling was something that was, of course, popular back in the 17th century as well. It's always been a very popular pastime. On page 5, we have the recognition that this legacy that Pascal and Fermat created influenced the casino industry. Still another legacy of the correspondence is the casino industry. It is truly an industry, and a highly profitable one, because the casinos do not gamble. They leave that to their customers. Using the ability that probability theory, which is what Pascal and Fermat started to develop here, using the ability that probability theory gives them to predict the outcome of games of chance, they can calculate in advance exactly how much money they will make each week. So casinos are not gambling. So the idea or the desire to calculate the probability of winning was was something that was being approached more and more throughout 1500s, 1600s. And one of the key players in this was Cardano. Cardano is an individual that we have run into in other books. I say we, I have run into him in other books. He's a very colorful individual at all, but he published a book on dice rolling, and that was one of the first treatments of dice rolling, I believe. So there's already this idea of trying to get the best edge, the idea that people are trying to figure out the best way to beat the cards, beat the dice, and make money. People who were professional gamblers, people who really wanted to come ahead in life through gambling, that was something they wanted to do, and they wanted to give themselves the best odds. So there was this interest in gambling. It wasn't initially approached from any sort of mathematical theory like it would now. Of course, they could try all they wanted, but remember, a lot of these games are still not going to be in your favor. On page 45, there's a quote. It says, Cardano clearly realized that this himself, for he wrote, the greatest advantage from gambling comes from not playing at all. This is a more accurate description would be that the rules decrease the likelihood of losing. So I'm talking about Cardano's work. He's trying to decrease his likelihood of losing because he recognizes that the best way to win is to not play at all, which reminds me of the little tagline that where I live, advertisers are required to put on their gambling ads where it says like, knowing your limits is always the best bet. You're losing if you're gambling. Long-term, you're going to lose. The math is not in your favor. So Cardano had an expressed interest in trying to win at cards, at dice, in gambling. I think he was a dice player. So the focus of this book is between a conversation or a letter exchange that occurred between Fermat and Pascal, in which they are trying to determine the best way to split the winnings if a dice game is interrupted, but one player is ahead of the other. So if they're going to roll out of 6 times and they've only rolled 3 or 4 of those times, but one player is up by a certain number of points, but now they can no longer continue the game, how do they split the winnings between these 2 players? If one player only needs to roll like 1 more time to win, but the other player could theoretically still win and catch up by winning the next, how do you split the pot equally between these 2, taking into account the current state of the game? And Pascal and Fermat went back and forth. You get the sense that Fermat was maybe was better able to understand and grasp the situation, but throughout the letter, which is divided, the letter starts each chapter and the author digs into a little bit about what that section of the letter is, and the letters are presented in the back of the book as well. They are able to kind of build this theory of probability and calculate how future events would have played out, or the probability of future events playing out, and use those probabilities to calculate how the winnings should be split between the 2 players. And to do this, they approached the game as though they were adding a 3rd player, and you understand the pitfalls that they could fall into, but I think the author does a really good job of explaining how to get to the correct answer as well, which I think is a very interesting exercise as you start. When you first read the problem, I would suggest sitting down and seeing if you can figure out the solution and if you can figure out the best way to split the winnings, given one player is ahead at the point where the game is interrupted and can no longer be played. So this exchange was could have just been a minor exchange, but it actually kicked off this very powerful idea of the ability to, again, calculate probability of an event occurring. And this is what's going to lead to a massive boom in probability and statistics, and has led into a field that is used everywhere today. I mean, medicine uses it, insurance uses it, airlines use it, everybody uses probability and statistics, and it was something that was perceived of as being impossible 600 some years ago, because it was believed that no one could know the probability of what's going on besides God, but also there was no practical way to calculate these probabilities that hadn't been discovered yet. So the book doesn't end just once this exchange occurs. The author does go a little bit into some of the outcomes or things that happened because of this discussion. So one of the things that happened because of this came from an individual. I'm going to specifically reference page 92. His name is John Grant. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. And he was an individual who used some of this to calculate statistics based off mortuary rolls. So one of the things that was very interesting from a historical perspective is you could subscribe to the bills of mortality, which was a listing of, I guess, who died of what in your neighborhood, because you were trying to see if maybe like a fever or a plague had come into your neighborhood. You wanted to see it, which I guess is not too different from looking at the obituaries today, especially if you live in a small town. You got to read the obituaries and see who passed away. But this would be a little HIPAA violating to get a list of exactly why everyone dies. But John Grant began doing some calculations based on these bills of mortality, and was able to draw a lot of interesting conclusions. He was actually one of the first people to scientifically say the births of boys and girls are roughly equal, which is something that I'm guessing people had guessed at in the past, but he was able to prove it based on information that he was calculating based on this probability and statistics field that had been kicked off by Pascal and Fermat. He also was able to determine the average family size in London. So he was doing some of these basic statistical calculations using data, which previously was just that tabulation and collection of data, which I mentioned at the beginning. Statistics was basically just collecting data. Now we can start manipulating the data and doing statistics and probability on the data to find probabilities that something is going to occur. And also this could be used to sell these what are they called? they were using mortality rates to sell. It wasn't like bonds, but it was something similar. So you could sell something like a life insurance policy to determine the likelihood that you're going to die, which is something that we still do today. We're calculating the odds in all sorts of insurance, the odds that you're going to cause a car crash that your insurance is going to have to pay out, the odds that you're going to get a speeding ticket, the odds that you're going to get some sort of disease and the health insurance company is going to have to pay it out. So insurance uses this quite a bit, and this Grant, I don't know how to say his name, guy did a lot of work with that. Overall, this was a very interesting book. It's very brief, it reads very quickly. It's a little under 120, oh no, it's like 180 pages, but it reads very, very quickly. It is very engaging. I feel like it's not super math heavy, but it also doesn't hold your hand. So there's not like pages and pages of calculations necessarily, but it doesn't go super slow. So it is assuming a base level of basic, like elementary level mathematics. I thought it was an interesting look into the birth of the probability and statistics field. And so if you have any interest in that, I would recommend The Unfinished Game. It was an enjoyable read. I had a fun time reading it. And if you have read this book, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.